Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today we're going to be doing my June reset. And I just want to say that if you hear some like background noise, nature has decided that the perfect time to start downpouring and thundering is right when I'm ready to film. So it will be what it is. Hopefully we will treat it as ambience instead of annoying. So we're going to start by talking about my May reads, and then we're going to get into my June reading journal setup and my TBR. The first thing that I read in May was Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now overall I would say it was a very enjoyable read and continuation of like the characters and plots from the first book. We got a lot more Shalyn, I don't know. Fantasy names always escape me. But I really liked that. She's probably my favorite character so far. I just think she's the most interesting, and maybe that is just because she's a woman. A woman. I feel like I tend to find the female characters more interesting. I mean, at least if they're well written, and I do think that she is. Sanderson so far has done a good job in my opinion with female characters, although like there could be a few more because there's mostly male main characters in this and then just Shalyn thrown in, so we could do with a few more, but I don't know. I think she's still a very compelling character and she has a very interesting backstory, so it's interesting to see how that has kind of held her back so far and see her continue to sort of work through it and move forward into the person that she can be when she's able to finally deal with all of the trauma in her past. And I really liked how we had like some chapters sprinkled throughout that started closest to the time of the current events and then slowly like worked their way back to reveal sort of what actually happened in this like moment that we've heard a lot about, and it has been presented to appear like one thing happened, but then when we get there, even though we got hints throughout that maybe things did not actually happen as we kind of were like hinted that they were, it was still a bit of a surprise to me what actually did happen, and I thought it was very interesting and well done, and I think you can see the effects that moment has had on Shalyn, and I just felt that was quite well done. Now Kaladin spends quite a lot of his time in this book being frustrating and annoying, and I do understand sort of like why he's like that. Like, he's trying to deal with a lot of stuff. The man has trauma, especially when it comes to the light eyes, and now in his current position he's having to deal with them a lot more, so it's understandable that he has a lot to work through. But something about the way he reacts to it, like, it's totally different from how Shalyn is dealing with her trauma, and he just becomes kind of obstinate. Okay, apparently my camera decided that it would be fun to shut off partly through my discussion of this book. So let's go over that again, starting where we left off. I was a little bit frustrated with Kaladin. I'm not totally sure where exactly I got cut off, but my man just, I feel like he needs to calm down a little bit. And my cat is stepping on my feet. Hi, Mimi. She always decides she wants attention when I'm filming. She sees me get on camera and she's like, oh, absolutely not. Pet Mimi right now. Okay, so Words of Radiance. I think what I was about to say was that overall I felt the pacing was decent, although I do think in some elements could have been trimmed down a bit. This book's 1,000 pages long, and for the most part I feel like it's earned, like things are happening or we're getting character development or something like that that makes it like interesting, and you keep reading and you don't necessarily feel like it's like dragging a lot. But it is just a lot of pages. It took me quite a few days to read this, and it seems like it doesn't bother most people since the series and Sanderson have become extremely popular, but I do think that just the length might be a little bit of a barrier of entry to some people, because some people are intimidated by really long books, but maybe it's just not for them then, I guess. Alright, and then there is one spoilery thing I want to talk about, so skip to the next book review if you don't want to have any spoilers. Are you gone? Okay. I'm going to presume that if you don't want spoilers, you're gone. So there is like a little bit of a romance that's hinted at between Kaladin and Shalyn, and it is just like very like light hints, but I caught it. And I feel like we're gonna lean more into that, and I'm not really here for it. I just feel like it's a common thing in books for there to be like a couple that's like set up like within the story or actually like set up by their families. And hi, Kitty. And every book seems to want to break that couple apart because there's some guy over here who's suddenly like much more interesting and apparently a better match for the woman, because it's always the woman. And honestly, like, I don't mind the trope sometimes, but I just feel like this happens so commonly in books that it's become a bit boring. And I feel like I like Shalyn and Adeline together. He's a bit more of a himbo, but you know, they're in their like Taylor Swift, Travis, whatever his name is era, okay? Like, let them be. Just because she's smarter than him in like the intellectual type of field doesn't mean he's not bringing anything to the table. And I just feel like that's like the direction we're gonna go down, and then it's gonna end up being like Adeline gets really jealous because all three of them are like Knights Radiance and he's not, and he's also like potentially gonna lose Shalyn to Kaladin. I just feel like we're gonna go down this whole route where Adeline becomes very like bitter and maybe is convinced by some like evil or whatever to work against them. And yeah, I don't know, we'll see if that's right, but that's my prediction based on the bits that we've gotten so far. So if you've already read the series and that's happened, don't tell me, keep it to yourself obviously, but I'm curious to know if that's a correct guess. Alright, next up we have 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by KJ Parker. This is a kind of fun little palate cleanser. It's got humor sort of along the lines of things like Discworld, where it's kind of a little bit like sarcastic, self-aware kind of vibes. And I honestly don't really have a ton to say about this book. I liked it, but I didn't like love it. I felt that the first half was maybe a little bit dry and slow, despite the fact that like things were happening. So I mean, if it was dry and slow when things were happening, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't in the mood for this book. But yeah, the second half I enjoyed a lot more. I felt like the dynamics became a lot more interesting. I'm having a hard time explaining how I felt about this book, but honestly I just kind of felt mostly mid. But the thing that I did like was the relationship dynamics. I just felt that there were a lot of unique relationships that we don't necessarily have represented a ton in fantasy. And there was one that I found quite interesting where the whole book was kind of presented as like one thing, and then we got this piece of backstory and it turned out that it was actually this other thing, but then knowing it was this thing, you can kind of see how it was that thing all along, which I think is good, because obviously sometimes you get a twist and you're like looking back and you're like, that doesn't make sense at all because this was different then. But that was not the case in this. I did enjoy that little sort of twist, and yeah, it was overall a decent read. Like I said, I don't have a ton to say about this. I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, so I feel like it's a lot easier to say stuff about books that you either feel really strongly about one way or the other. This I felt kind of neutral on. You might enjoy it if you like that kind of humor, or if you want something sort of shorter, faster, and more sort of lighthearted in some ways to read between your like Words of Radiance type books. Alright, after that I read Relic of the Gods by Philip C. Quaintrell. This is book 3 of the Echoes saga, and honestly this series is giving me kind of a bad introduction to the self-published world because they are really just not very well written. I think they read like they were only edited by Philip like one time, and really they desperately needed several passes with a professional editor. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars, which is kind of in line with the ratings I've given to the first 2 books. And I do just want to point out right now, I said this in my reading vlog, but these books, the last 2 that I've had, they are not well constructed. Pages just come out everywhere. So if you were interested in this series, just know that the books will fall apart on you most likely. If it was just one book, I could have been like, okay, he got a bad one. But 2 books, I don't know, it's starting to set a trend that I'm not particularly fond of. But I won't go on too much about the writing. I've talked about it before, and I don't want to continue to bang on him about it, but I do have something new to complain about in this book, and that is that they just do like a casual... So there's this group of people who are like inarguably terrible. They like capture dragons and elves, and they kind of make them like fight it out, fight to death in this gladiator style. All right, Mimi wants to be here for this because she's yelling at me. That's clearly what you want, right? Okay, so I forgot what I was saying, but they make them fight out in like a gladiator style arena, which obviously is not great. That's not like a cool thing to do. So yeah, and they also heavily imply that they use the captured elves as sex slaves. So there are for sure really, really terrible people within this society, and maybe they have some bad societal vices, but the dragons decide that they are going to kill all of these people and destroy all of their cities. And at one point, one of the elves is watching the dragons like burn a bunch of children to a crisp as they try to run away, and I think it was this female elf, she's kind of just like, oh, you know, I kind of feel like I should feel bad about this. And the one dragon is just like, oh, no, you see, it's okay because the evil is like inherited, it's genetic, you know, the children are just as evil as the parents. It's like a society thing or a race thing. I don't really know I think they're supposed to be not quite human. I don't know exactly, it's not super well explained. But the idea is that like all of these people are evil and that it's like in their genetics, which like, I don't really think that's how genetics works. I don't think there's like an evil gene. But maybe there is in fantasy. But it came across really poorly. It felt like a horrible take, a horrible scene, just terrible vibes. Like, I feel people use the excuse that like that group over there is evil because they're not us as an excuse to do terrible things in the real world. And so to include it so casually in a book just feels extremely out of touch. And maybe it's just like fresh in my mind because of the crimes that Israel is currently committing against the Palestinians. But it really, really kind of destroyed any semblance I might have had to enjoy this book when he went that way. I was like, hey, if he had not done that, I may have been able to like look past the bad writing and still enjoy this book. But overall, it's just kind of like, excuse me, can we just not do casual genocides in books, please? I feel like that's not too much to ask for. And then finally we have Endure by Alex Hutchinson. Technically I'm not quite finished this one, but I only have an hour and a half left, so I'm pretty sure I'll be finishing it before the end of the month, which is still like 5 days out from the time of recording. But I'm gonna tentatively give this book 4 out of 5 stars. And this is actually kind of another one that I don't have like a ton to say about. It's hitting most of the things that I look for in nonfiction, like it's teaching me something and it's quite engaging. But the main thing where I feel like it's sort of letting me down or letting itself down a little bit is I don't feel like I'm really getting a lot of like things that I can like take away and apply, specifically because this book is like, it's about human endurance in general, but it talks a lot about how endurance relates to running and endurance in the running field. So I was really hoping that I would be able to come away with like some tips and stuff that I could apply to my own distance running. But a lot of the stuff it talks about is either like things I kind of knew on some level or things that they're like still currently studying, so there's not a lot of conclusive evidence for one way or another. And while I appreciate that he's giving us like the most up-to-date stuff and I'm learning a lot about like the current studies in the field of endurance, it is like, it does make me kind of feel like maybe if he had waited for some of these studies that he wanted to talk about to be more resolved and conclusive, that the book would have been more impactful for people, maybe. I don't know. We still have an hour and a half left, so I could get some great tips in that last little bit of time, but as of now, I do feel a little bit like it's missing a little something, so I think 4 stars is a fair rating. Well, that is all of the books that I read in May, although maybe I'll have time to slip another one in before the end of the month. If so, I'll talk about it in my June reading wrap up. But let's go ahead and jump straight into my reading journal where we will be setting up for June. All right, friends, welcome into my reading journal. So I'm going to talk about what I'm doing in just a minute, but I realized as I was putting this together that I forgot to review The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence, because I also read that and I just somehow managed to forget that I had read it. So I guess that kind of is a bit of a review in and of itself. that I had already forgotten the book. But I would say that overall, it was a good book, but I think for the amount of hype that I'd heard about it, it wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. I think the prose was really beautiful. I really enjoyed a lot of his like writing style and a lot of like his word choices and how he described things, but it was a very slow moving book. Now I do read a lot of books that are slow moving and I can enjoy it, but I don't know, something about this one, it just like wasn't hitting. And I think partially because he uses really nice prose, he tends to describe things a lot, and sometimes I felt like things were over described. So like where I would find myself skipping a little bit and then like force myself to go back and read it, and like obviously the words, like once I read them, they were really nice and well constructed sentences and all that kind of stuff. But I think maybe he could have trimmed a little bit to make the first half move a little bit more quickly. And I think it was partially also because we don't really exactly know where we're going at the beginning. We're just kind of going and seeing what happens. And I think that contributed to it feeling slow because we're just kind of moving along through the story and I had no idea like what the plan was. So, yeah. It wasn't my favorite, but I did really like, as I said, the writing and like the descriptions of the library, the world building surrounding the library was really cool. I'm not really super sure about the whole Saber thing. Um, yeah, I don't want to talk too much about the plot because I feel like it's pretty easy to sort of give some stuff away. So I won't go too much depth into that. But there was a twist, probably a little bit around 3/4, maybe probably a little bit later than that, that I did not see coming. And it was really interesting. And I think that it will give him, and he has already sort of started to explore what that means to the people and challenging their preconceived notions of what the other was. Essentially, it's really hard to I don't want to say too much because I feel like it would be easy to give away. So I liked that, and I liked the descriptions of the library, the world building there, and even some of the characters. Some of them kind of a bit flat, bit boring, but I think that can kind of happen when you have a very singular character focused book. Although there are two main characters, but I just like Evar, I just didn't find him nearly as compelling as Levira, although she suffers from the problem of the main character who's just like really good at everything. Like she's not good at everything, but she's like portrayed as so smart that it's like so easy for her to learn stuff. And I do find that trope to be a little bit like, come on, let them struggle a little bit. But she does struggle in other ways, so it is what it is. But reading journal. We've lost most of our time to talk about that. But, oh right, I never rated the book. I would say it probably like 3.5 stars maybe. So now, reading journal. I really want to do like a night kind of sky theme, but not like dark, if you know what I mean. Originally, I was looking at these washi tapes that I have, and I have one that's like blue sky with like clouds, and then there's like a black one with stars. And I was trying to figure out a way to combine those and like add doodles to make to be able to incorporate the washi tape into the theme. But I couldn't really get it to work. I just have a hard time getting washi tape to like work with doodles. I feel like it works best when you're like gluing other stuff in. But in the end, I managed to figure out this kind of night sky theme that doesn't really involve washi tape, and it's that trying to encapsulate that like moment where like the sun has set and the moon is out, but the light from the sun isn't totally gone yet. So you get an interesting combination of like the last flares of sunlight and also the stars and the moon in the night sky. So that was the goal. I like how it came out. I like being able to use some brighter colors is fun as always. And yeah, so as you saw, we already did our title page and my month in review page, and now we are working on my to be read page, and then opposite it is going to be my pages read. So I decided to create like mini versions of the gradient from the front on here, but without the window frame. I couldn't decide at the end if I wanted to add just like an outline or like a frame or anything, and I ended up not. But I'm not wondering if I should, just to like hide the unevenness of the edges, because it's a lot harder to make the edge straight when you're going into different colors and doing the horizontal lines instead of vertical. But I wanted to change up the font a little bit for this just because I felt like the stamps that I used in the front or like on the title page would look a little lost in all the space that I left for the header. And I contemplated using like a banner, but I didn't really feel like it fit the vibe. So I decided to go with like a very typical bullet journal, like chunky cursive type of font, which I think worked for it. It did feel still a little bit like lonely up there, but I ended up adding some silver star sparkle things, the same way as I did to the gradients and like inside the window on the title page. And also clouds. I have this white marker, and it was kind of, I understand that it's hard to make opaque white ink that will go over top of dark covers. So I had to do a couple of coats with that white pen. And actually I kind of like the slightly transparent look. I feel like it makes sense and I don't know, looks cute. And then I'm using a Uniball silver pen for the stars of the night sky and decorating around the top. You can't really see them in the video. I think they're easier to see in person, but when the light catches them in the video, you can kind of see them, so I'll take it. And then here is the flip through. So my title page with the window and then the other spread. All right, welcome back from my reading journal. It is now time to talk about my TBR for the month of June. And honestly, I kind of feel like I don't really super know what I want to read this month, so I've made a TBR pile, but it's kind of a very loose TBR because I'm not super sure what exactly I want to read, but let's go ahead and talk about what I've picked out regardless. So first I have Picture of Dorian Gray. I have put this on several TBRs so far, but I have actually already started it now. This is my workbook, I've decided, since if I bring it to work, then I have nothing else to read on my lunch break, so I'll be forced to read it. And I'm about 40 pages in. It seems decent so far, but I'm going to, of course, reserve judgment until I've actually read more than that. So yeah, this is the first thing, and then I also am putting Emma on my TBR again. I just feel like I want to break out of the fantasy a little bit, so I have a few classics laying around, so I figure why not try to read those. So yes, this is also a recurring TBR book, but here we are. And then after that, we're going to get into some fantasy. So first I have A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This I have owned for a while. It's been on my TBR for a while, and I just asked my partner, I was like, what should I read this month? And he chose this one. So I'm putting it on the TBR. We shall see if I read it. I did enjoy Prior to the Orange Tree. I did just kind of feel like it was longer than I needed it to be. But yeah, this one's also quite long, so we shall see how it goes. But I've read longer books. So yeah, Prior to the Orange Tree. I believe this not Prior to the Orange Tree, Day of Fallen Night. This, I believe, is the prequel. After that, I have a reread. I want to reread Assassin's Apprentice. I said in a video a little while ago that I wanted to do a video talking about the Realm of the Elderling series in general, but that it's been a while since I read this first trilogy, so I want to reread it. And this one is not too long. It's around 400 pages. Yeah, just over 400 pages. So that one won't take me too long to read, and it's also a reread, so I feel like rereads go slightly faster. After that, I have put Dead House Gates on my TBR yet again. I said I was going to read Malazan this year, and I still have not read a single one, so I need to read this before I forget everything that happened in the first book. But yeah, I just haven't felt super inspired to read them, and it is like 900 something pages, so I feel like you need to be in the right mood to pick up a 900 page book. But hopefully this month I will start it, but if not, what can you do? It is not the time if it's not the time, if that makes sense, which I don't think it does, because whatever. Dead House Gates, you get it. Next I have Valor by John Gwynne. This is book 2 of The Faithful of the Fallen, and I read Malice earlier this year, and I finally saw book 2 in the bookstore. I feel like they never have the book in the series that you're looking for there, but they finally did, so I picked it up, and yeah, I enjoyed that series quite a bit. It wasn't like, well, that first book quite a bit. It wasn't specifically like a top favorite, but it was very enjoyable, pretty quick paced, so I'm looking forward to continuing it. And then the final thing I have here is Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. This is a bind up of the whole trilogy consisting of Dragonflight, Dragon Quest, and The White Dragon. I don't think I specifically want to read all three in a row. I think I'm going to read them separately, so I'm going to say that Dragonflight is the one on the TBR for this month. And I'm working on a video about, like, well, I don't want to say specifically, but this did come up during my research, and I also want to read more fantasy by female authors. So I definitely want to get to Dragonflight this month, even if the rest of my TBR is very loose, I'm not really totally sure what I'm in the mood for reading this month. But that is all that I have time for today, so let me know in the comments what you're planning to read in the month of June. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.